Thank you everyone for being here this morning. Welcome to this edition of this morning's Flipping Scary Stories session. Without further ado, I'm going to turn you over to our presenters.
Hello, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen real quick to give an introduction. Can everyone see the PowerPoint slide? This is the Learning Human 2020 session. I'm glad they made that change on behalf of all females out there. But the Flipping Scary Story session today is, I think you've all seen the background description, but we're going to be featuring kind of a blended approach that brings together two key collaborators, one which I'm representing, which is the Transformative Engagement and Capacity Initiative. And my name is Juliana Gavish, and I'm based in the Global Futures Laboratory, but I also run this relatively new university-wide initiative here at ASU. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but I want to give a chance for everyone to quickly just introduce themselves, because we've got a wide variety team here, great amount of artists and scholars combined. So if everyone just wants to introduce themselves and sort of their affiliation, and we'll go into the backgrounds of our various initiatives in a second. So Brennan, you want to take it off?
Yes, I'm Brandon Meckley, research faculty of the Synthesis Center, which is in our School of Arts, Media, and Engineering. And Garrett.
Hi, I'm Garrett Johnson, a PhD student in the School of Arts, Media, and Engineering. Use he, him pronouns, and really happy to be here today. Gabriele, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Gabriel, calling in from San Francisco. I have experience as a product manager in educational technology, currently collaborating with the Synthesis Center.
Muindi?
Hi, my name is Muindi. I am at the University of Washington, actually, and I do some collaborative work with the Synthesis Center and some research into performance and philosophy.
Cool. Peter?
Hi, I'm Peter Weisman. I'm the technical director for the School of Arts, Media, Engineering, and I collaborate with Synthesis Center on the physical aspects of research.
Ivan?
I don't think Ivan is here. I saw Tian. Tian, would you like to say hi? If not, let's go to Andrew.
Hi, my name is Andrew. I'm a recent master's student grad from the School of Arts, Media, and Engineering, and I now work for Synthesis.
Great. Thank you, everybody. And you'll see the team later too as they do their demos. I just wanted to give everybody a chance in the beginning. So again, my name is Juliana Gavish. I'm based with Global Futures Laboratory, which is also a relatively new university institute here at Arizona State University. And I lead this Transformative Engagement and Capacity Initiative, which is going to focus on sort of how we explore the role of engagement, and to get us kicked off and thinking about what engagement is for each one of you in your own perspectives. I was hoping that we could go into a little exercise, and what I'm going to have you all do, if you have a pen and paper nearby, if not, that's fine. You can just put it in the chat, but just do a free brainstorm. And I'm showing you two examples of actually exercises that were completed by students of mine in a graduate course on rethinking community engagement. And I'd like you to just take a quick 3 minutes, just jot down whatever comes to mind with the term engagement. You can do it like this, which is imagery, if you have a pen and paper nearby or something on your computer. Otherwise, you can just do it and type out the words in the chat, and it's fine. We're not going to discuss it in the beginning because we'll do this exercise again at the end. So we'll just take a couple minutes now, if everybody could do that. And don't lose the paper or whatever you're writing this down on, if you're writing it down at all, because we're going to have you do the same thing at the end and possibly share back if you're open to it. All right. So I'm going to move on in the interest of time. I'm going to share my screen again real quick, and I'll give you just a quick background on my initiative, and then I'm going to turn it over to Garrett, and he'll talk a little bit, or actually show you, which is the better option, a little bit more about what the Synthesis Center is, which is the key collaborator here on this session. So give me 1 second. So the Transformative Engagement and Capacity Initiative, really this formed initially, it was called the Engagement Philosophies and Praxis Initiatives, academic talk, but we really came together as more of a initial faculty working group that morphed into this broader initiative. And the idea behind it was that we each were coming to this kind of realization that engagement was a core part of our scholarship, our teaching, our practice in different forms. And my own background is actually spanning a wide breadth of, I would say, scholarship and practivism, which I like to call it. So I'm very much deeply engaged in global international development and sustainability work. But I also do a lot on the side of teaching and developing new experiential learning programs. And so this initiative was really for us at the outset about how do we come to understand what engagement is for us, how this looks, and how we even came to learn different skill sets or mechanisms for engagement in our work and begin to apply that. And what we were discovering in this process of deep reflexivity or reflection together was that there wasn't a lot of training for this, at least not in our academic backgrounds. Now, I had a lot of training in my other hats that I've worn over my career, but it was becoming more and more clear that this was an area that is constantly being encouraged and emphasized in higher education in particular, about like collaborative engagement and community engagement and all of these key aspects, but we weren't really questioning how, why, or for whom we're doing this. And so part of the initiative, it's now evolved into what we're calling this Transformative Engagement and Capacity Initiative, because we recognize, one, that it can't just be about perpetuating the age-old like kind of participatory models of engagement that tend to only go so far and leave out a lot of voices, leave out a lot of perspectives, and people that should be meaningfully a part of that collective process. But also the idea that there's a lot of capacity building that's needed. And so this is both a learning and development for ourselves as well as our students and our partners with whom we work around the world. But it's also about how do we think and transform the way that we conceptualize and approach embody engagement in our work. And so that's one of the things that actually brought me to first connect with the Synthesis Center. And they'll talk a little bit more about this idea of embodied learning and embodied practice a bit as we go, and you'll see examples of this. But one of the core ethos behind this is that it's not just about building individual leadership development or capacity, but it's really about this collective capacity building for transformation pathways. And we talk about plural pathways because the idea behind transformation is that it's not a one right answer. Just as engagement, there's not one right protocol or one right process. It really has to be context specific. It really has to be driven and led as a co-creative process, an emergent process. And so I put down here sort of these core questions that we ask ourselves as we're constantly evolving both this initiative, but also the way we're thinking about and approaching engagement in our work. So first and foremost, and I want you guys to reflect on these, if you would, throughout as you're viewing the different demos that are presented to you today, as sort of how does that shape and challenge you to rethink your own approaches or ways that you're conceptualizing engagement. So first and foremost, important to any transformation work is, what do you stand for? What are the values and principles that drive you that towards the change you're seeking to create? What is your purpose? What's your why? How and with whom do you engage? For what purpose? And what environments or what types of ways are you kind of thinking outside of the traditional zones of the human community engagement? What's the value that's added by collective engagement? So this is the part about the collective capacity building, and then the shared vision. So we really are striving in this term of capacity building to really facilitate or catalyze radical action and learning. So that's what we see as sort of a core ethos of this. And this actually links to a international external entity that I am a lead, a part of, which is focused on the SDG Transformation Forum. And that I oversee what's called our Transforming Capacity Steward team. And these very much go hand in hand. I'm kind of developing sort of a parallel that will eventually intersect. But in the meantime, this is the in-house version of that at Arizona State University. And so I'm going to kick it over to Garrett in a second, but just to give you a sense of some other questions to think about as we go through, it's really about the strengths-based or resource perspective and how do we cultivate capacity. And this idea of the importance of navigating sort of this uncertainty and ambiguity, which is so much important right now when we're thinking about the multi-level compounding crises that we're facing, and really this vulnerability state, and about transformative learning, which is a key part of the type of approaches I use for engagement. Essential to that is this idea of really flipping sort of this vulnerability as sort of a scary, and in line with our theme today, sort of as a scary space that we don't want to enter, that we want to protect ourselves against, really as a source of power or empowerment. And why vulnerability is really that space of transformative learning and transformation. And for me, the most powerful aspect of being able to cultivate that is through this deep level co-creative engagement. And so there's different ways, there's different mechanisms of doing that. I'm sure you all have examples in your work that you might be able to share. And we'll have a discussion at the end that might offer some chance to bring that up. But over to you now, Garrett. I'm gonna stop sharing.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I'm fine with your just grid view. Thank you so much, Juliana. I mean, we began to sort of outline how synthesis and techie can come together. Just to reiterate, my name is Garrett Johnson, and I'm helping to organize the telematic embodied learning project that's happening inside the Synthesis Center. In particular, I think we've heard a lot of scary stories revolving around the pandemic during the Learning Man event. It seems like everything is sort of scary stories. The Four Non Blondes song that led us into this discussion, I think, was right on point to set the tone here. And I also, speaking for myself as an instructor, somebody who teaches an intro class in our department, something that's really resonated with me about what Juliana said is this notion of capacity. And I start to wonder the degree to which the university has the capacity to deal with, of course, with the crisis in general. But I also think that, in my own experience, anecdotally, the crisis is foregrounding insufficiencies and inequalities that have already existed in the learning system, right? And so one of the things that I think that we want to emphasize at Synthesis Center is the role of the body in learning. And we'll come back to that throughout our demos and our presentation, and hopefully we can speak about that as well. But also, personally, being that I teach in this program called Digital Culture, which brings together like a sort of media studies, critical thinking about society, sort of cultural studies, creative practice in the vein of artistic making or some other making, and also technical skills in the form of programming and working with actual techne, working with materials. There are so many modes of learning that are kind of concressing all the time. And there are absolutely ways in which the learning management systems and Zoom, which has been presented to us as sort of the alternative to being in person, have precluded, I think, a whole plethora of modes of learning. And what's more, I think that we're also quite dissatisfied with the way in which they amplify certain kinds of voices, certain kinds of learning, certain kinds of learners' voices. So for instance, some students are going to excel in learning management systems because it's textually based, right? Whereas, less neurotypical students may be ostracized and exercised from those environments. So we're actually very interested in bringing neurodiversity into the very beginning of the design process as a consideration. With that, I'm going to hand it to Brandon, Brandon Meckley, who's one of our research faculty at Synthesis, who's going to give a sort of bigger overview about what Synthesis has been up to over the last 20 years in responsive media, of course, before the pandemic, which will sort of set the scene for our telematic embodied learning initiative.
Yeah, thanks. So I'll try to keep it pretty brief here because we have lots of interesting newer demos to show. But I figured I'd give it just a brief overview of Synthesis. So Synthesis, and before that, for about 20 years with the Topological Media Lab at University of Concordia, which our director, Xiaoxin Wei, directed. One of our focuses has been on producing responsive media environments. So these are media environments that aren't just video or audio, but also affective qualities like lighting, atmosphere, or maybe elements of architecture that all respond in real time with human activity and non-human activity within them. So we've been interested in media that doesn't just respond to the full range of the human body, what it affords, but also what social groups afford. So, for example, what can people do through coordinated activity that they couldn't do individually, for example, behind a computer screen? Or as another example, with a simulation, can people produce phenomena that they couldn't produce individually, but as a group? So I think, now with the pandemic, also issues, for example, fossil fuel consumption with large gatherings, or, some people don't have the ability to gain access to these spaces. We're interested in looking how we can kind of apply the lessons that we've learned from responsive media to telematic scenarios. So that could be, the classroom or public meetings. So with that, I'll give it back to Garrett, and we can talk about how we've been looking at this in the context of learning.
Thanks, Brandon. So to keep it short, we'll go ahead and move right into our demos. We have 3 demos today. One is virtual classrooms. The second will be Heatscapes, complexity, and tabletop weather simulations. And the third will be a media choreography improvisation that represents a module from an online course that we'd like to premiere in the fall. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to Gabriel.
Sure thing, thanks. I'll share my screen. All right, so hopefully you guys can see that. So yeah, to kick off the series of demos, so we've been developing this concept as a way of addressing, along with the questions that Juliana, Brandon, and Garrett have already mentioned, also the question of, well, how can we make a different use of the spaces that we currently inhabit? This is particularly poignant during the pandemic, but it also applies in general in cases of as distance learning becomes a common practice. What does that say about the body? What does that say about turning the home into a learning environment? And what are the implications of that on the body and sociality? And specifically, what does it mean for education? So you'll see more sophisticated examples of the kinds of technologies that Synthesis Center is producing later on. But to start, we just looked at specifically, the classroom setting. And we put together this concept of, we're exploring this concept of sutured spaces for virtual classrooms. Sutured spaces being the techniques involved, and virtual classrooms being more a reference to the set of use cases, like the most immediate essential use cases that we know teachers are facing, or needs that they're facing right now. So what is this? Well, sutured space, you could describe it in many ways. It's technology that's been used before, but one way of describing it is, we're interested in creating multimedia portals that blend or open a view into and between remote physical spaces. So when you think of Zoom, well, Zoom does this already. We would like to take it a step further and actually enable also engagement in a physical space, and even better, engagement together and in a physical space together. The most basic setup that we've been playing around with is just having, an overhead projector, a camera that could just be used, it could be the camera from your mobile phone. And even just the most basic kind of a shift from, having this kind of foveal or frontal view to being able to view the workspace that a student or a teacher or any participant is working in. Even that just radically changes the kind of affordances of that learning space, of that virtual and physical space that you're in. An additional aspect of this is we also want students and teachers, as students and as teachers, we want to be able to interact with each other's workspaces, be able to see what other people are doing in our workspace, and leverage both the physical affordances of our own environment, but also the multimedia and virtual affordances that technology grants us. So we actually have a video demo for what this might look like in practice. It was developed by a couple of our developers, I think it's Andrew and Ivan. So yeah, I feel like we can just show that prototype.
This is so much better. And that's because Portal video communication is a much better experience.
Sorry, I need to restart that.
Man, I am so bored. Maybe I can give Andrew a call.
Hey Andrew.
Hey man, what's up?
Just really bored.
I feel that. Hold on one sec. I'm gonna throw you up on the portal.
Okay, great.
This is so much better. And that's because Portal video communication is a much better experience.
Yeah, I think we can keep driving.
Action.
Okay, sure.
If you wouldn't mind giving me a spotlight, Garrett, and if all of you who are on the line could get on speaker view. And so what we have here, oh no, not, could you do the other one, Garrett, for spotlight? There we go. And so what we have here is kind of like a mock-up of the space. So I'm in my own space, I'm here. I have another video in which I could be talking to somebody else. And let's say that I'm trying to draw somebody, and I'm drawing with a friend of mine who's here on the screen. I'm trying to teach them how to draw something. So right now, what I'm doubling here is my own screen. But imagine that that's somebody else's screen, and as I start drawing a circle, they follow me, and they produce the same kind of image. And so this is just one of like the kind of like virtual classroom setups that we are trying to operate. So what we have here is you have a space in which I can do something and I can see what the other person's doing at the same time and kind of guide their behavior. And at the same time, you can imagine this also reversed. And so the other me over here, who could be Gabriele over there, will be seeing himself on this outside or himself on an inside, and then being able to draw with me. And so Gabriele, would you mind going back to, I guess, slide 2? At the top right, we have an example of this, where we have two people in different spaces kind of working on the same space. This is kind of like a one-to-one relationship that we have here. But go back to the following slide is what we would like to do is we would like to have a kind of more dynamic relationship that can function from here. So for instance, if you were a teacher in a class with 3 students in an actual classroom, you can give a lesson and you can kind of walk around the students' desks and see what they are working on at any given time and kind of give a student personal attention or kind of direct other students to look at that one student's desk. And this is a kind of capacity that's not enabled currently with Zoom. In Zoom, everybody's in a little small screen. And so with that kind of virtual interface that we were showing you before, we imagine that we could have like several students and a teacher. And so we have a teacher marked as T, we have S1, S2, and S3 here for 3 student desks. In the dark, the kind of fully outlined figures that you see on the desks are real objects that everybody has in their own space, while the outlined objects are projections of the screens of another individual. So for instance, you notice that the blue balloon is on student one screen, but it's projected on the teacher's screen in kind of like an outline. So the teacher can kind of do something with the cube that they have on their desk and kind of show, using that cube, to the student number one what to do there. And then also you can see with student number two's desk and student number three's desk, number three has a sheet of paper that's projected on student two's desk, and as well as onto the teacher's desk. Student number two doesn't have any object projected on his desk, but just has a bunch of virtual objects that he's engaged with, including a little video that's there. That's kind of like a kind of digital media entity that can also be manipulated by the students and teachers at the same time. And so what we're trying to do here is to create a kind of environment in which students and teachers can work on, not necessarily work on the same space, but where there's a virtual space, a third space projected onto their actual space that allows them to engage with each other in a much richer way. And we've been kind of deploying this, this set of techniques and tools in some kind of small scale lessons and seminars that we've done.
All right, let's see, how much time do we have for this?
We should ideally keep moving, I think, if that's okay.
Okay.
Sorry, Gabe.
Yeah,
Brandon, are you ready to take over to speak about heatscapes and tabletop weather simulations?
Sure.
Great.
So this is a project that was built off a class that we collaborated with Arian Middle from the Shade Lab in Arts Media Engineering, and she studies urban heat. And what we were interested in the class, since this was a class in digital culture, was not just teaching students and learning about heat and our experience of felt heat, but also being able to create an environment where we could experience heat data in a different way. So in this environment that we created in the class, you can see that people can collaborate to navigate a map that has data plotted on top of it of mean radiant temperature around ASU. And then also there are field recordings that were taken around campus by students that you can hear as you move through the environment, and 360-degree video that was taken. So thinking about this telematically, kind of drawing on some past work that we've done in portals. So this is a project Table of Content, where we're looking at these tabletop interactions. We're looking at how we could kind of adapt this towards something where maybe you have two small groups in different locations that are interacting telematically with a shared representation of data. So in this case, I can use the slide rule to physically navigate the map, zooming in and out. And then I also have these pucks, so I can move around the map and rotate. And then using this metaphor of the how these pucks are on top of each other as layers, I can start to scroll through the data. So this could be used, you know, in a more context than just heat as well. So different types of data like energy use, or you know, maybe housing costs or something like this. So looking also at the simulations that we were showing earlier, we're looking at how this kind of system can be used for that. So the idea would be that using some of the tools that were just discussed with telematic embodied learning, we can display not just video, but you know, maybe these pucks could have media objects associated with them, such as images or videos that people can move around to different locations to be physically engaging with each other, even though they're telematic. So in this case, I can interact with the simulation physically, and that would be in a shared simulation space. And then also, I can start to work with parameters of the model as well. So in this case, we have a directional marker that I can rotate to change the direction of gravity, as well as the magnitude of the gravity with this slide rule. Which changes the heat and then condensing of the clouds. And then also, moving beyond these kind of smart objects that have these kind of special purposes, we can look at using more general purpose materials, such as tape, to start doing experiments. So this could just be, any object that could be differentiated from the table. And so the idea is having something unlike simulations on the computer where you have to be modifying parameters in a file or drawing something with your mouse on a screen. This can really rapidly be played with in a much more physical way. And adjusted. So one thing we're looking at is, both for education, this would be really useful for classes. Obviously, this example would be physics. But you could imagine these could also be simulations of things like, energy use or, social simulations, not necessarily just these physical simulations. So it's kind of our next steps with this. So, yep.
Thanks so much, Brandon. So bookmarking the tabletop interaction, we want to turn the mic over to our last demo. This will be the Techie TEL House Band, headed up by Connor Rawls, who will say a bit more about a course that we're looking to offer, which will allow students without any coding skills to compose with and perform with expressive media instruments. Connor?
All right. So my name is Connor Rawls. I didn't really introduce myself at the beginning, and I'm programming staff at Synthesis. So traditionally, we would teach an upper division course to our undergraduates where we take a deep dive into the different techniques used in creating these responsive environments that Brandon and others have shown. But with all that's gone on, we need to be able to take these same techniques but teach them to a broader audience, and hopefully over the internet. So to that end, we have created a bunch of compiled applications that are using the same techniques in a way that we could hand them out to 200 level students instead of 400 level students for them to explore and play and learn to build these environments without needing to actually spend time learning the nitty-gritty of what's running underneath. So today we're going to do a short improvisational jam session with, there's 3 of us here, I think, prepped to go, Andrew Robinson, Peter Weisman, and myself. So both of the other 2 gentlemen are going to be doing different sort of sonic audio pieces, and feel free to uh, pin their views to your speaker view if you want. You can watch what they're doing as they're adjusting parameters on their end to change the sound you're hearing. And I will be running a visual component that is listening to their audio through Zoom and then creating a visual effect that you can all see. So feel free to look at any one of us, leave it grid view, you can watch all of us. Are the other two of you ready?
Yep.
All set.
Alrighty, let's rock.
All right, let's give a clap emoji to the TEL Techie band. With that, that concludes our demos. I'm happy to pass over to Juliana, who can transition us into the Q&A workshop segment.
Thank you, guys, and thank you, everybody from the Synthesis Center. So we threw a lot of these really all over the map kind of approaches to engaging in a very different way. And so before we jump into a full discussion, I'd like to have you again once more, if you would jot down ideas, images, whatever comes to mind of what you would associate with engagement. And then I'm going to have people volunteer to a couple people just to share out their pre versus post demo representations of this. So just take another minute or two. Well, I'm not going to force anybody since this is a camp thing. It's supposed to be fun. But I would encourage you, if there's like any ideas that come to mind, even some reactions to the demos that you saw. What we want to really focus our discussion on, or at least get it jump-started around, and I'm going to just quickly post a question in the chat here. But you saw this on my slide earlier, and I want us to kind of think about, especially knowing what we're up against right now, both with regards to the pandemic, but also these multi-level crises that are unfolding, and the fact that even if and when things begin to reopen more fully again, there's going to be a drastic shift in how we think about or are willing to engage, at least for some time. And so I'm wondering sort of how, recognizing that context we're in and sort of the tools or challenges you're up against, whether it's interpersonal engagement and relationships, or it's in your work as an educator, or a tech or media specialist, or whatever role that you have out in the world, how your approaches to engagement may be shifting or need to change. And so I pose this from the question of, what beliefs, values, behaviors, or strategies are you clinging to now? Clinging to as in like from the past that sort of worked for you, that you really got comfortable in, that you really feel like you need to start to unlearn or let go of in order to create space for alternative perspectives or pathways or mechanisms for engagement. So I want to put that out there as a question, and then give Brandon or Garrett a chance if they want to pose any other questions for themselves. And if there's anything you have for the specific leads of the demos that you'd like to ask them, we're taking that now as well. We have about a few minutes left, but we can run a little bit over. So if you're willing and want to hang on, that's great. If not, we want to thank you in advance before you jump off for joining us today. So the floor is open. All right, Deidre. So you're English. Hey, do you want to share it all, or do you want to just us reflect this out to everybody? You're welcome.
Well, I've been thinking about sort of co-curricular opportunities and what it means for students to have immersive experiences. And so when I'm only thinking about my classroom or my syllabus and how I translate that into teaching practice, I can kind of handle that with the combination of Blackboard and Zoom. I feel like the courses are not what they were, but I'm very comfortable in the online space, so I'm okay with that. I'm less comfortable thinking about all the other learning opportunities that our students have, that I think that they really need to remain connected to their academic program, to their sense of engagement for degree progression. So it's not just my course.
Yeah. No, I hear you.
I want to think creatively about how I can think about those co-curricular and really immersive learning experiences that students do find so important.
Now, you said you're comfortable with sort of that online space. I'm wondering, like, some of the things that were presented today, would that be kind of too extreme to even want to broach trying to embed or learn a little bit of those tool sets to be able to use to create more of that immersive experience?
I'm not sure how it would help in a classroom of 25.
Gotcha. So I don't know.
With a small group. And so that's why I'm thinking about clubs and activities and other ways that's more student initiated, student led activism, for example, and the sharing of ideas for that. I can see that in a way, and I can see small groups in a way But
Yeah.
in a larger class, it's focused on a textual basis anyway.
I hear you. Do any of our synthesis folks want to like respond to that? Share maybe some ideas of what might be possible.
Yeah, I have a very similar concern. And like I said, I think this was a concern even before the pandemic. So our undergraduate program is growing and growing fast, and it's also very experimental. It's this thing called digital culture, and you can emphasize in anything from dance to game development to graphic design and even English literature. And one of the things that the program has, I'll say struggled with is figuring out how to develop a kind of cohort-based community, and then also encourage peripheral learning, or I would call it peripheral learning, from like older cohorts to younger cohorts, right? I think that was already a concern before the pandemic when we had the affordances of physical space. And now I think that those concerns are, more evenly distributed. So one of the things that we're thinking quite a lot about and was perhaps not showcased in the demos today as it should be, but is basically the affordances of asynchronous learning in addition to synchronous learning. So, many of you saw, of course, this article that came out said do a bad job putting your courses online, and I think there's a lot of power there. Insofar as I think I underestimate my students' abilities to be engaged and to be present in a synchronous setting, like a Zoom thing, right? And this goes back to the neurodiversity thing. So how is it that we can create spaces that allow students to engage asynchronously, but also give them a sense of community, right? So not just like we got the YouTube videos up, we got the Canvas up where you can do the discussion posts, but something which is a bit more meaningful. And we don't have anything, there are some other projects that we're looking at that want to take that seriously, that come from our own practice as researchers in say like advanced reading groups, and higher level seminars where there is a lot of rapport between members of a community, and we want to have a way to encourage more reflexive and iterative learning, right? While trying to capture, for lack of a better term, the things that happen offline, right? What doesn't happen in front of the Zoom, right? How is it that some of that, whatever the person chooses to make public can be made public to the rest of the community? So these are questions that I think we're absolutely aware of and very interested in taking seriously.
Several folks brought up the inclusivity and equity issue, which is huge. I mean, there's no denying that gap has become ever more transparent in the middle of this pandemic. And I'm wondering, for example, Deidre, you mentioned this a bit, Sarah, you raised it, and Aaron as well, about what are you noticing are some of the trends in your direct communities that you're working with or students that you're working with? And have you explored different ways to kind of adapt around those inadequacies? Is there strategies that you've incorporated that we might be able to draw on, or someone from our synthesis center, how you're reframing perhaps some of these approaches you demoed today to really address some of those gaps? Because I think that was a key thing that we had talked a lot about in the past. So small space ideas for Aaron?
I don't know if it's a not all of us all at once thing, but I'll jump in there.
Sorry.
So I have two jobs in higher ed, both thankfully online. My viral load risk is still relatively low working at home. So I support the ASU earned admission program. So phenomenal in terms of granting access to learners everywhere. But the number of participants have doubled this session because people aren't working. Their triggered event to come back to school is now, and we're overwhelmed with resources. So that's probably a good problem. More people are getting access to education. And then in my day job at Western Governors University, I teach an experiential emotional intelligence based course in communication and leadership to healthcare professionals. So healthcare professionals on the front lines of this pandemic, different emotional ways as far as access being synchronous in Zoom. Some of them are logging in from the hospital behind 2 masks, so that presence and immediacy is jeopardized. Or they have a house full of husbands and children, and they're vying for connectivity or vying for advice. So while I love Zoom, I'm probably the biggest proponent of Zoom and what it can mean for online learning. If you are coming to our Zoom session via a smartphone, because everyone else in your house is on the computer or using your bandwidth, you're not going to be able to use the chat feature or open documents or share your screen as effectively if we're all here in front of a desktop computer. So just trying to exercise judgment. I'm so glad you're here. If you can't participate in, a technologically mediated space, like, come off mute. I would rather hear from you than lose you entirely. But yeah, lots of things afloat in this given climate.
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. You raised a really important thing that I didn't get a chance to talk about in interest of time, but this idea, and I did put it in the chat at one point, this idea of engagement from the cognitive, the psychomotor, and the affective, so the emotional side. And that's something that, we're becoming less and less equipped at being able to do when we're removed from the physical environment and being able to really have that authentic and emotive type of experience in person. When I talk about experiential learning, it is definitely not what I would associate traditionally with kind of virtual or technologically based. But I've had to rethink and reimagine what that looks like in COVID. And I think the key piece that's got a lot of work to do, and I really want to challenge our Synthesis Center group to also think about this, is how do we generate more of that emotive? I think the music piece was one of those that kind of just, it evoked that from us, or at least it did for me, maybe not for everybody else. But how do we introduce more of that emotive connection building that is not really facilitated naturally through something like a basic video call, right? And allowing sort of these different tool sets and mechanisms to challenge all of those aspects, that whole-bodied, embodied learning that we talked about earlier. So we are definitely over time already, but if folks want to add a final comment or anything, and again, thank you guys for joining us today and for kind of bearing with our switching of multiple technological views. But I also want to thank the Synthesis Center for putting together a great showcase of some amazing work that they're doing. And it doesn't do it justice. Honestly, I've been in there in person and you can't really capture that as fully, but it's a lot of really cool stuff. So any final thoughts from anybody, including our team?
Yeah, I'll say something that builds on what Juliana mentioned about transformative learning. I mean, one of the biggest barriers that I have in my class is getting students out of the sort of standardized paradigm that they've taken up from K through 12 education, right? That there are certain kinds of standards that need to be met, right? And honestly, I think Canvas and Blackboard are working so hard against that in so many regards, right? Because the sort of what we sort of speak about internally is this kind of ping pong, and then there's like a sort of dropped ball, which is this kind of recurrent rhythm in classroom environments, right? Here's the lecture, do a response, right? And then it goes on Canvas to die, right? So I honestly think if we want to take transformative education, and again, to sort of rethink education post-pandemic to understand what it means to produce subjectivities that are sufficient to the world we live in, we have to rethink Canvas entirely, right? And we have to start from a different paradigm than management, right? I think management is absolutely toxic, right? And there are political reasons for that too. I want to say something about accessibility. This is a huge concern for us. We're also speaking to for instance, various prep academies and also some public schools around Tempe and Arizona and other places. And we don't expect that that students necessarily have a huge budget. One of the principles that we're working with is thinking about technical setups as being, well, first of all, flexible, but second of all, asymmetrical. So if an instructor, for instance, has a more robust setup, they can still afford and leverage the kinds of expressivities that the system aspires to, while a student who maybe only has a smartphone can engage as I think, was it Susan? As Sarah mentioned, can still engage, right? And they still benefit from it, perhaps not as much, but yeah, we absolutely don't expect that students will have all of these technologies, but want to have a kind of sliding scale. That wasn't the most expressive note to end on.
My comment to Erin is basically talk to the Synthesis Center, because what they're also aiming to do is not just create more high-tech, inaccessible tools that no one can really access unless you are in one of their environments where these fancy objects are at your disposal. They're really trying to leverage these high-tech and really innovative ways of engaging, but also integrating into that more of the, I forget the proper term for it, but Shinwei uses it all the time, where it's like the general physical objects that are at our disposal, our own environments. How do we integrate that in a more engaging and embodied way that allows, for example, something where we can jot down on a sketchpad, as we were seeing in the demo of the virtual classroom, right? And you have the physical, very basic level materials that are being shared through this virtual communication that you really can't create elsewhere. And it's enabling more of that authentic kind of, I guess, something that we are most familiar with in a classroom, and allows us to kind of extend that into a whole new realm, a kind of a third realm of learning, so to speak. So that's really something that they're wanting feedback on and wanting to explore more deeply. So if you have ideas or comments or even a challenge you want to pose to them and say, like, can you help me do this? I can guarantee, I'm sure they're all shaking their heads, but I can guarantee they'll be open to it. And again, thank you all for joining us today. If you have further questions, feel free to reach out to the host and they can put you in contact with us, the host as in of this entire Learning Human event. And we'd be more than happy to follow up with you. All right, thanks everybody.